Nemesis Reborn is the newly reimagined Bolliger Mabillard inverted coaster at Alton Towers. This ride opened back in 1994 as Nemesis, and it was absolutely beloved. This was widely considered to be the world's best invert, and one of the UK's best, if not the best, coaster. The forceful elements and unique setting were a special combination. But after 3 decades of operation, this legendary coaster needed a full refurbishment. In advance of the 2024 season, the ride received a nearly full retrack, updated theming, and a rebranding. Does this make it better than before? Find out in this review. The fact that Nemesis even exists is almost a miracle. Those familiar with Alton Towers know that this park cannot build above the tree line. Most parks take this at face value and restrict themselves to smaller or shorter rides. Time and time again, this park has shown their creativity over the years while remaining compliant with local regulations, and Nemesis is the best example of this. Nemesis has an official height of just 42 feet, or 13 meters, but it has a change in elevation of 104 feet, or 32 meters. The park accomplished this by digging a series of trenches. This not only made the ride possible, but it significantly enhanced the ride experience. It augments the sense of speed, and it causes a unique sequencing unlike any other invert. It is hard to imagine a world without Nemesis, and I know locals had to deal with that back in 2023 while the coaster was rebuilt. But this ride almost didn't happen. Ever since the 1990s, Alton Towers has given their major new coasters secret weapon code names. Nemesis was Secret Weapon 3, but this was the first secret weapon to be realized and actually built. Secret Weapons 1 and 2 would have been an Arrow pipeline coaster. There was a prototype at Arrow's Utah facility, but none were ever built at a park. Alton Towers creative director John Wardley rode the prototype and was not impressed. He found the coaster slow, boring, rough, and energy inefficient, so the park pivoted towards other ideas. Shortly thereafter, Wardley learned of Batman the Ride, the world's first inverted coaster being built at Six Flags Great America by Bolliger Mabillard. Wardley rode Batman the Ride shortly before it opened to the public in 1992, and he immediately knew that was the type of ride he wanted at Alton Towers. It was not going to be easy with the park's height restriction, but B&M and Alton Towers found a way to build Nemesis. And just 2 years later in 1994, Nemesis opened to rave reviews. The success of this ride spawned multiple spin-offs. One of Merlin's sister parks in Thorpe Park opened a B&M invert named Nemesis Inferno in 2003. It has some volcanic theming at the center, but it's not as strongly integrated into the experience as the Nemesis monster. And the ride is noticeably less intense as well. I personally think Phantasialand's Black Mamba is closer to Nemesis in theory. This is another B&M invert with a heavy use of underground trenches. The layout is more conventional, but the visuals are on par with Nemesis, and I think it offers good forces too. Alton Towers also opened Nemesis Subterra in 2012. This introduced the military organization of the Phalanx, which eventually became an overlying theme for Forbidden Valley. The ride was closed for several years, but reopened in 2023, and it's a delightfully creepy experience that builds on the lore. And the park has not one, but 2 different holes at their mini golf course themed around this coaster. Flash forward to 2022. Nemesis was still arguably the park's most popular attraction, but it needed major maintenance to continue operating. Plans were presented to the town where a majority of the track and supports would be replaced. These plans were approved. Nemesis operated through the 2022 season, but it was closed for the entire 2023 season when it was rebuilt. The ride reopened at the start of the 2024 season as Nemesis Reborn. This included several changes, mostly aesthetic. The ride's track was switched from a rusty white to a deep black. Then the spine was decorated with these red vein effects. These look incredible and really pop. I hope the park is able to keep up with these over the years and it doesn't start to fade or peel. The monster was also upgraded. As before, The station's designed as a giant monster with tentacles sprouting outwards, and the track interacts with it at a few points. But the monster now is a giant eye, represented by a video screen. It reacts whenever a train dispatches or passes by. Then the outside has these menacing claws, a few of which move. The station is ominous red lighting, and it looks incredible. Staff members are wearing themed garb, and many get into their roles. Then Forbidden Valley as a whole was plussed. The Phalanx's presence feels stronger. Then the park is protesters roaming the area, demanding that Nemesis be freed. It is a small touch, but it adds a lot to the area. That's on top of the coaster whizzing past pathways. I love how close you can get to the helix. Then the final corkscrew is a spectacle with the fog and adjacent bus honking. You also have some new vantage points in 2024, as the ride's original queue was reopened, meaning you now circle the entire layout before boarding. The ride itself arguably looks better than ever in 2024. One thing that I hope returns in future seasons is the use of water. Originally, the trenches were filled with blood-colored water, but around 2012, the red dye was removed. This is because the red dye was leaching in nearby streams and rivers whenever excess water was pumped out of the area. Afterwards, Nemesis had regular colored water features, which still add a lot to the experience, but these did not return in 2024. The coaster does not sound as ferocious as before, but that is intentional. The ride previously had a distinctive roar that could be heard echoing throughout the park. You could also hear it outside the park, which wasn't pleasing to neighbors. So during the refurb, the track was filled with sand to quiet the coaster. This made neighbors happy. You still hear a roar in close proximity, but it's not nearly as pronounced. What really catches your ear is the ride's awesome soundtrack. It is epic and menacing, and it plays throughout the area. It really gets you amped up for your ride. Nemesis has good capacity and usually fast dispatches. It has 2 trains and almost always operates with both. Each train holds up to 32 riders, as there are 8 rows of 4. This is one of those rides that often sees its highest demand at the start of the day. Hotel guests have an exclusive entrance into Forbidden Valley, so this understandably is a convenient first stop. For many years, Nemesis was offered to hotel guests for exclusive ride time in the morning. That perk stopped for a few years in 2019, but it was brought back for the summer of 2024. If you're using the main park's entrance, it is prudent to return to Nemesis later in the day, especially on days when hotel guests do not have ERT. That is because the coaster will already have a sizable wait by the time you reach it. Because of this ride's throughput and location, it usually is a much shorter wait during the second half of the day. If you do visit on a busy day, this ride can get hour-plus waits. If needed, Nemesis is included in the park's paid fast-track skip-the-line system. The merge point is just before the station, so you usually board in less than 5 minutes, so this saves a ton of time. For 2024 at least, Nemesis is only included in the highest Platinum Fast Track tier. This costs over £100 per person per day, but you do get unlimited rides on Nemesis at least. I suspect this coaster will be added to the lower tiers in future seasons, because it is being handled as a new ride this year. The original Nemesis was always a super reliable attraction, but Reborn has had some teething issues this year. There have been a few days this year when the coaster is not opened at all. When this happens, it is often seen cycling an empty train for hours. I had this happen in one of my visits this year, but the park at least managed to get Nemesis open for the final hour of the day. I'm hoping this issue, whatever it is resolved in the off-season. One negative change with Reborn is that seating is now almost always assigned. There is no longer a dedicated front row queue. This is a major bummer because this is the best row in the ride for the visuals, and that is a major part of the experience. The forces are strong no matter where you sit, so at least there is not a bad seat. But I do think a few elements have a bit more oomph and back. Staff members usually fill the train front to back. Some tips if you want a specific seat though. 1. A few staff members will allow you to request a different open row, such as the back, but none will let you wait for a row that's already occupied. 2. If you arrive early in the day, there is a chance there will not be a staff member at grouper, but this is not guaranteed. When this happens, you can freely select any open row, and I saw a few people who were able to wait back for the front row. 3. If you see an incomplete group waiting for row 1, you can split your party up. My friend and I did this summer. If we saw 3 guests lined up for row 1, one of us would say we were a party of 1 to take turns riding up front. I would love if choice seating became an option in future years, but I'm still skeptical that'll ever happen given how this park handles the other coasters. The ride still retains the familiar hard over-the-shoulder restraints. These are found on the older B&M loopers. These are fine because Nemesis is a very smooth coaster. At no point did I hit my head in the older new version. That being said, I have seen some people criticize Reborn for having a rattle. The original Nemesis was glass smooth, even in its final years. I am pleased to say that I still found Reborn very smooth. It didn't shake much at all for me, and I got 17 rides throughout the train. The only spot with a noticeable rattle was the final turn, but it did not cause any headbanging or discomfort. It was just present, so it wasn't a big deal for me. Once dispatched, the eye awakens, which is quite the sight for those spectating. You turn out of the station and ascend the lift hill. You're never more than a few feet above the ground, as this hugs the hillside. When you reach the top, you have a small dip and a gradual leftward turn. This is tame, but if the ride's queue is long enough, you'll get some fun interactions with the adjacent queue. This leads to a small dip. It is faintly floaty in the back seats, but it more importantly begins the process of Nemesis accumulating speed. This coaster just keeps burrowing deeper into the ground, allowing it to continuously build up speed as it goes. Another quirk with this layout is the inversion sequence. They're out of order compared to a traditional B&M looper. The first inversion here is a corkscrew, and it offers great whip. I know some people were worried the retrack would negatively impact this ride's intensity, but it still has the power and ferocity of an old school invert. That is best exemplified by the following element, a downwards helix. This is super intense. It is so forceful that the park took the opportunity to beef up the support structure during the retrack. Riders are pummeled with extremely strong and sustained positive Gs. I routinely gray out at this spot. The visuals are impressive as well. You have a crazy head chopper with the monorail. You only avoid it because of how abruptly you're snapped 90 degrees sideways. Then the spiral hugs the ground and finishes above a flooded valley. Without delay, you charge through a 0G roll above the station. This too has some fantastic visuals. Your feet narrowly avoid the monster, and that beast also launches a plume of smoke towards the train, and you pass right on through it. The element is also powerful as well. It has some excellent whip as you rapidly rotate 360 degrees. It is quite dizzying. You then have a turnaround that hugs a rocky hillside. At the same time, you are wrapping around a helicopter. It's a cool visual. The entry and turn itself are on the tamer side, but the resultant drop really pulls you downwards. It is the single largest drop on the ride, and since it takes you to the lowest point, I believe this is where you hit the max speed of 50 miles per hour or 80 kilometers per hour. Next is a vertical loop. It slows down ever so slightly at the apex, but the entry and exit have strong positive Gs. You are pinned to your seat from the power. This is also located above some water, and the following tunnel is super tight, so the visuals are amazing, particularly up front. Then you have a wide turnaround above the midway and around the station. On my initial rides back in 2017, the train felt like it would stall out midway through it. That was not the case in 2024. The turn was not all that forceful, but the train at least held solid pace through it. and the train rebuilds a lot of speed as it plunges into another underground tunnel. This is filled with fog to disorient you. When you emerge, you have the fourth and final inversion. It is a bizarre corkscrew. It is straighter than most, so it feels like the hybrid of a corkscrew and zero-G roll. This thing is extremely snappy, and it violently flips the train. Honestly, it may be my favorite inversion on the ride between the forces and visuals. The exit plunges into another fog-filled underground tunnel. Then you have a mild turn upwards. It bleeds off a lot of speed as you climb out of the trench, but it's not too big of a deal because it is the last element. You then hit the brakes and return to the station, ending the 2,349 foot or 716 meter long coaster. Nemesis does not have many flaws, but length is definitely a drawback. This ride is on the shorter side, especially compared to other inverts. But I really don't know how much longer Nemesis could have realistically gone on for, given the modest initial height, so I get why it ends when it does. In terms of pacing, Nemesis is great. The setting and visuals enhance the sense of speed. Then the inversions are strong and placed beautifully. You can get a light breather on a few of the turns, but Nemesis quickly returns to action. It's less disruptive than a mid-course brake run found on a lot of other B&M loopers. Now, one thing I hope to try one day is a night ride on this coaster. Nemesis has always looked so atmospheric and amazing lit up at night. But Alton Towers sadly closes way too early for this, unless you visit during their Halloween event. So, what would I rate Nemesis Reborn? I'd give this coaster a 9.5 out of 10. This is a very unique coaster. The terrain use is exemplary, and having this degree of theming on a high-thrill coaster is a treat. Then this ride has some fantastic elements. The 4 inversions are super snappy and intense. Then that helix is incredible. The biggest con with this coaster is its short length, but I would rather this coaster end with a bang rather than tacking on a bunch of fluff and filler that add nothing. How does this compare to the other inverts? I could see many having this as their favorite. Nemesis has always had this mythical status in the coaster community, so it is possible to overhype this ride. The key thing to know is the forces, while strong, are probably a step below Batman the Ride. It is not the most forceful B&M invert, but it is up there. What truly makes Nemesis special compared to the pack is when it combines the visuals with that degree of power. That is what elevates the experience into that upper echelon. As a result, Nemesis is my second or third favorite invert. Osiris at Park Asterix in cold weather is my favorite invert because it also has nice theming and more diverse elements. Nemesis is around Montu at Busch Gardens Tampa for me in terms of quality. Montu is the size and more elements, but Nemesis is more tightly paced and has much better visuals. The final thing I want to know is that Alton Towers served this ride right with its large refurbishment. This is how you restore a ride. They not only invested in a classic to ensure its longevity, but they found ways to plus the look and theming so they could appropriately market it as a new experience. That helps the park get a return on investment because it cost a pretty penny to essentially rebuild the coaster. I really hope other parks look to what Merlin did here when it comes time to rebuild their aging steel coasters. I think Nemesis Reborn is a better overall experience now. So those are my thoughts on Nemesis Reborn at Alton Towers. What are your thoughts on this coaster and the big refurbishment? Do you prefer old Nemesis or Reborn? Let me know down in the comments. If you enjoyed this review, I would appreciate it if you gave this video a like, and you consider subscribing, because there'll be a lot more roller coaster and amusement park videos here at Canopy Coaster. Thanks for watching.